murder of John Lennon, the assassination of John F. Kennedy, the attack on Ronald Reagan, several murders and infamous serial killers, all relate back to this mysterious entity. The possible assassination trigger, mind control technology, or explanation of the meaning of life. It is the Tool of Madmen. This entity, surrounded in mystery, is a sacred text known as The Catcher in the Rye. Written by J.D. Salinger and published in 1951, the novel would become one of the best yet most controversial ever. It is one of the most banned books of its time, but is now a required novel for many schools throughout the country. The novel is narrated by a lonely and depressed protagonist named Holden Caulfield, who details a journey he experiences at the age of 16. The novel deals with the concern of a loss of innocence. So how does this text relate to numerous assassinations and serial killers? What is it about this novel that makes people consider it an assassination trigger? What is it about The Catcher in the Rye that makes it the Tool of Madmen? December 8th, 1980. Beatles star John Lennon is murdered. His assassin, a 25-year-old man named Mark Chapman, who used the novel as his defense in court. Chapman had a troubled and lonely childhood. He was tormented by family tensions and was even more isolated at school. Chapman often sought out to live in a fantasy world to avoid his troubles. At the age of 16, he first read The Catcher in the Rye. He connected with the angst and loneliness of the narrator Holden Caulfield and shared his contempt towards phoniness. Like Holden, Chapman had a love for children and saving their innocence, which is why he worked at YMCA children's camps, where he was very successful in helping the kids. Despite this, Chapman continued to live in a depressed and lonely life after high school, and even attempted suicide. Chapman's hatred towards phoniness only increased as he aged and became more obsessed with the novel. He viewed John Lennon as the epitome of this phoniness, since he preached peace and love yet lived a millionaire lifestyle. Chapman decided to resign his job as a security guard with a strange gesture.
In the log sheet where he signed in, he instead of signing his regular name, he signed John Lennon.
What day was it?
October 23rd.
He bought a gun and then moved to New York, where he became obsessed with Lennon. Chapman realized Lennon's godless and phony ways had made children vulnerable to emulating them. He planned to kill Lennon so he could become the Catcher in the Rye, or the protector of children's innocence, and eliminate Lennon's phony ways. He later wrote,
Chapman writes, Lennon was a phony of highest degree, but there were others who could and would have served the same purpose.
On December the 8th, 1980, Chapman left his hotel to kill Lennon, where he left a Bible inscribed with the names Holden Caulfield and John Lennon. He waited outside of Lennon's hotel, the Dakota, for hours as he read The Catcher in the Rye. At 5 o'clock, he was able to stop Lennon, who left for a recording session to have him sign a copy of his newest album. When Lennon returned to the hotel later that night, Chapman found himself alone with him and fired.
Mr. Lennon?
Fall down dead.
He remained next to Lennon's body, calmly reading The Catcher in the Rye when the police arrived. Later, in police interviews, Chapman said,
Can you read the book? You think about me and the terrible fall and you read, "I'm sorry I told so many people about it. Don't ever tell anybody anything." And it might hit you. You might really come to the full scope of understanding of what I've stood for in my life, what the terrible fall was and what I'm doing now and what I will be doing in the future. It just might come to you. I'm praying that it will and that you realize that something very extraordinary has happened.
In court, he pled guilty to second-degree murder. He later revealed,
"The reason I killed John Lennon was to gain prominence, to promote the reading of J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye. I'm not saying I'm the Messiah or nothing like that. If you read the book and if you understand my past, but you seem to understand my past pretty well, and you would see that I am indeed the catcher in the rye of this generation."
It was only 1 year later when another horrific incident brought the Catcher in the Rye into the national spotlight. It involved a depressed and mentally ill man named John Hinckley, who attempted to assassinate Ronald Reagan to impress the woman he was obsessed with and stalked, Jodie Foster. Although Reagan was not killed, he was injured along with several other government officials. This includes Press Secretary James Brodie, who received a permanent disability from the incident, which led to his death in 2014. Like Chapman, Hinckley did not try to escape. When the police raided his house after the incident, they found the Catcher in the Rye on his coffee table. Although it is not certain that the Catcher in the Rye inspired his murder attempt like it did for Mark Chapman, frighteningly similar incidents followed. One such incident occurred on July the 18th, 1989, when Robert John Bardo, 19, murdered actress and model Rebecca Schaeffer. Bardo came from a dysfunctional family. He was mentally ill and had stalked celebrities before. He became particularly obsessed with Schaeffer and hired a private investigator for stalking purposes. After stalking her for months, a mentally ill Robert Bardo went to her home and killed her. Just like Mark Chapman, Bardo was in possession of the Catcher in the Rye at the crime scene. After the murder, he ran away and threw the novel onto the roof of a nearby building. He was later caught in Tucson, Arizona, where he was found walking aimlessly in traffic. According to Bardo, he killed Schaeffer because
"I have an obsession with the unattainable. I have to eliminate what I cannot attain."
So was it the Catcher in the Rye that inspired these murders, or were they inspired by Chapman's assassination of John Lennon instead? The latter is unlikely, because 17 years prior to Lennon's murder, there was another infamous incident that had relations with the novel. This incident was John F. Kennedy's assassination. His killer was a 24-year-old man named Lee Harvey Oswald. Oswald had a neglectful childhood and was depressed and mentally ill. Like Chapman, he attempted to kill himself prior to the assassinations. Oswald claimed to kill Kennedy because of an opposition to the United States and a disagreement with Kennedy's political views. When police raided his home, he was found to have a copy of The Catcher in the Rye in his apartment. Unclaimed sources believed that this was his favourite novel. If these incidences were all inspired or caused by The Catcher in the Rye, then isn't it likely that there are connections between other murders and the novel that haven't been found? Conspiracists believe that the novel influenced cult leader and killer Charles Manson, serial killer Ted Bundy, Jonestown founder Jim Jones, the Washington sniper John Muhammad, the Boston Strangler Albert DeSalvo, the unidentified Zodiac killer, and the Oklahoma bomber Timothy McVeigh. So is there something about The Catcher in the Rye that caused its relations with all these infamous murders? Some believe the novel is associated with the infamous CIA mind control program known as MK-Ultra. This program was developed after World War II and was largely motivated by the fear of the Soviet Union. Declassified documents indicate that some of the experiments involved with the program were designed to convince people to assassinate others. Since MK-Ultra began, around the same time the novel was published, it is rumoured that the CIA implemented codes in the book that brainwashed the readers. It's even been proved by multiple declassified documents that some of the patients and participants in the experiments were completely hypnotised and forced to follow commands, only after reading a set of words in a particular order. Although it is possible that the Catcher in the Rye could be a mind control mechanism, there are many possibilities that it is not. So what else could have caused its relation with the killers? It is likely that the kind of people that feel especially deep connections with protagonist Holden Caulfield's isolation and depression are already more likely to become murderers than those who do not have the feeling of isolation. Just like the killers, Caulfield exemplifies traits and symptoms of mental illness when he experiences moments of emotional and violent outbursts, acts severely depressed and lonely, and ponders about suicide. Even if a connection with Caulfield's mental illness ceases to exist, the manner in which his loneliness and depression is described often yields a deep feeling of connection from the book. This feeling of connection, combined with the book's popularity among all of society, makes it more likely than not that some serial killers and murderers had a passion for the novel. It's highly probable that this passion existed separately from their true desire and motives to kill, and could easily be mistaken as part of the murder case. As for Mark Chapman, his intention to kill John Lennon could have been caused by something different than what even he thought.
I think he's basically a schizophrenic who has, to a certain extent, lived in a fantasy world for many years, who has also suffered from severe depressions, and who committed this awful act for many reasons, not the least of which was, without him quite being aware of it, an attempt to cope with his feelings of depression and suicide.
His schizophrenia could have resulted in a faulty interpretation of the novel, whilst simultaneously hindering his ability to make choices, leading to his decision to kill. Whether The Catcher in the Rye is an assassination trigger or not, its true role in the murders will always remain a mystery. What is for sure is that, positive or negative, the book has and continues to have an impact on those who read it.